As we've been talking about pasture pork operations, I wanted to move next to challenges to pasture pork production. I'm Tony Nye from the Clinton County Extension with Ohio State University. And as we look at pasture pork, there are certain challenges that we must understand are there on a day-to-day basis, year to year. Such things as weather, particularly lots of rain during the rainy season, or our cold climates. And so these are things that we have to consider when we're housing our animals, how we're maintaining our pasture, how we're handling the well-being of all of our animals. And because of these challenges with weather, we sometimes get into needs with much more stockmanship required. We may have to do more manual labor, getting the shelters bedded for cold, wet temperatures. We may need to look at stocking rates. We may need to consider how our fencing is holding up. So all of those things go into the challenge. Another part of it, being a pasture pork operation, is how we maintain our ground cover. An adequate pasture pork operation utilizes the forages for part of the feed as well as the well-being of the animals and the ground cover for those invasive kind of weather episodes like heavy rains, heavy snows, and those types of situations. Keep in mind, this is an outdoor system, and so we need to keep in mind that we keep our buildings and our housing structures in good working order. We maintain our fence, we maintain our feeders and our waters so that our animals can get feed and water on a day-to-day basis, and they have the best living conditions we can provide. Parasite and microbial controls are also an issue, and so again, understanding that animals have requirements for parasite control and sometimes don't feel good. So working with a vet and having a great working relationship with an area large animal veterinarian is very beneficial. We also need to consider when we get into pork production from a pasture standpoint, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate genotypes that work well in a pasture situation. Not all genotypes of swine work in a pasture pork situation. So when we think about our pasture pork, we also have to consider managing that pig outside. So how do we catch a sick pig? How do we remove it from the rest of the animals so that we can safely treat that animal, take care of that animal, and make sure that we protect the rest of the animals if it's something that might be more of a virus type of sickness? How do we move the pigs when it's wet and rainy or thick layers of snow? How is the best way that we can move pigs from paddock to paddock or to market or from building to building? How do we also manage our pastures? At times of the year, we need to rest our pastures. So we can't utilize all of our land available to pasture pork all at the same time. We need to give those pastures opportunity for regrowth. So about every 1 to 3 months, we need to consider moving into a new paddock or a new pasture so that we allow pastures to rest for regrowth and just revive them from added stress. Whether it's a drought year or a wet year, we need to provide those rest periods. Every third year for disease and parasite control, we also need to rotate pastures. So if we have a larger operation where we may maintain animals on pasture for longer periods, from a disease and parasite control situation, we may want to actually fallow or leave those pastures vacant for up to a year and do this about once every 3 to 4 years in a cycle. When we think about other challenges, how do we plan for that pasture? How do we plan for our feeding strategies? How do we plan for water? How do we look at protecting our animals from wind and rain as well as sunshine? During the summer months, we can certainly get into the high 80s and 90s. We can have high levels of humidity during those summer months. So shade becomes important as well. So how do we plan all of that, not just growing the forage, but how do we plan for those pasture situations that best fit the well-being of those animals? Feeding and watering become very important in a pasture situation. So how do we handle water so that we maintain a cool, fresh supply? It can't be exposed to the daytime high temperatures and sunlight because our pigs are not going to want to drink extremely warm water. How do we keep the feeding system working so that in those inclement weather time frames, the feed doesn't get wet, doesn't get stale? It provides fresh, flowable feed that the pigs can have access to on an hour-by-hour, day-to-day basis. Again, understanding and thinking about not just the pasture aspect, but the whole picture of feeding, watering, shelter, fence, all of that plays into it. When we think about pasture pork, there are challenges when we look at forage utilization. Not all forages are created equal. The legumes as a group have a higher level of protein, calcium, and carotene than do grasses. They can furnish an adequate amount of vitamins, with the exception of vitamins D and B12. Usually we look to alfalfa, ladino, or sweet clover, red clover, and lespedeza as our primary legumes that we may use in a swine pasture situation. Alfalfa and ladino clover are probably our best two options. Ladino clover will not produce as much forage per acre, but it is somewhat superior in nutritional value. Where adapted, the use of the two together has increased yields, and certainly the improvement of nutritional value comes along with that. Perennial grasses such as orchard grass, endophyte-free tall fescue, timothy, and brome grass can also be used. And a lot of times we see this mixture, grass and legume, grown together as they provide the best advantages for increased total yields, a superior sod, so it holds up better during inclement weather and stocking rates, and it reduces the risk of losing the legumes through heaving and stress periods, especially during drought and drier time frames. Our stocking rate is important. We need to understand what size of an animal are we going to put out there, how many do we want to have out there. And so if we're looking at pigs from weaning, that 40 to 50 pound range up to 100 pounds, we can maybe put 15 to 30 per acre. But this is going to be dependent upon forage quality and forage availability. Also need to keep in mind, how can we rest those pastures? Sows with baby pigs or litters, we can only put about 6 to 8 out there per acre. Pigs over 100 pounds, we start reducing the number of animals per acre down from 15 to 30 on those smaller pigs, to now, once we're over 100 pounds, we should probably only have 10 to 20 animals per acre. Gestating sows, those sows that are waiting to have their baby pigs, we can increase that stocking rate to 8 to 12 versus 6 to 8 if we have litters. We need to keep in mind, the baby pigs take space. They will also utilize some of the forages as they get bigger before weaning, so we need to accommodate that along with the stocking rate. These are recommendations. Again, it's based on the quality of the forage, the pasture situations in terms of moisture, and how much space we have to hopefully rest our paddocks and our pastures. Advantages of pasture pork or pasture swine situations with forages or pasture: we can lower our costs of feed. And gestating sows, we can replace up to 50% of the grain and supplement with high quality pasture. I repeat, up to 50%, but it must be high quality pasture. Growing pigs can only replace about 10 to 20% of the grain, so those pigs 50 pounds to market weight, we can't utilize quite as much forages, so we're going to replace 10 to 20% of our regular commercial diet in a good pasture pork situation. The other advantages of pasture situations when we're raising swine is it provides great exercise and nutrients needed by breeding sows, or those animals that we use to raise baby pigs. Lower capital investments on a production system. We don't have the upkeep of big fancy buildings. We don't have a lot of needs for electricity. So lower capital costs, but it does require more maintenance and those kinds of things. Good use of our land not suitable for cropping is another advantage. It's best to isolate and provide disease control when we look at a pasture situation versus we're raising them in a building. If we have a disease issue, we would need to maybe clean that building, empty it, clean it, disinfect it. When we're outside in a pasture, we may be able to move animals around and provide better isolation and disease control through that means. Decrease the need for waste management problems. When we're out on a pasture, the animals spread their own manure. It can also decrease tail biting, or what we call cannibalism, because the pigs have more room to roam and move around. Along with the advantages to a pasture system, we have disadvantages. In a pasture situation, we have much more required labor for handling, feeding, watering. Just all the day-to-day takes more time on a per animal basis. Possibly greater problems with internal parasites. As our pastures get older, can we segregate those pastures so that they're not being used 1 year out of every 3? If we can't do that, we may have a growing issue with internal parasites. So that takes more management, more labor, more time. More labor during the farrowing system. When we're farrowing those sows, they are going to possibly not want to go to a sleeper box or a farrowing box, and we may have to move them. We may need to go out and inspect because that sow is not going to wait for the rain to quit or the inclement weather. So it takes more time and labor in managing our sows when they're farrowing. It decreases the amount of land we have available for cropland if we're utilizing good quality fields for our pasture pork situation. It may require slightly longer periods for hogs to reach market. Since they are in an outdoor production system and we're trying to utilize forages, we tend to see that those pigs will take a few more weeks to get to our target market weight. But again, utilizing primary genetics that are made for pasture situations will become more efficient, and our breeding program and our management will fit into that. Lack of environmental control and extreme weather. So no matter what time of year it is, we have Mother Nature to contend with. And so again, that can be a disadvantage. Can we handle 3-4 inches of rain over a 1-day period? Can we handle during the winter months if we're raising pigs year-round? Can we handle that 6 or 7 inches of snow or blowing snow and drifts? What do we do about predators? Again, we have lots of predators out there, whether they're eagles, hawks, coyotes, fox, the neighbor's dog. Any of those things can impact and have a disadvantage to a pasture pork situation. And so having a plan, utilizing maybe guard animals, making sure our pastures are predator tight so that we don't let them in. So again, advantages and disadvantages need to be considered, and at the end of the day, I think the advantages definitely outweigh the disadvantages.